Why did they laugh that day? Maybe because fear often hides behind mockery. Or maybe because it's easier to doubt someone quiet than to face what silence might mean. High in the thin air of the Bavarian Alps, the morning sun broke against the snowfields like glass. The wind sliced through the narrow valley, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of metal and oil from the firing line. Rows of young soldiers stood behind their rifles, boots planted in frozen gravel, faces tight with nerves and pride. Then came the laughter. "Gentlemen, take a good look," barked Master Sergeant Weber, his voice echoing off the stone. "They sent us a librarian to kill a dragon." The group chuckled, a few louder than others, those who wanted to impress him. Standing at the edge of the line, Sergeant Anna Reiter didn't move. Her body was still, wrapped in an oversized ghillie suit that looked too heavy for her narrow frame. The wind tugged at the loose threads like it was testing her resolve. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look up. Weber's boots crunched closer. He was the kind of man who built his authority from noise. The louder he was, the stronger he felt. "Sergeant," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm, "ever held anything heavier than a library stamp?" Another burst of laughter. Anna didn't answer. Her hands, roughened by years of training, moved with mechanical calm, checking the bolt, adjusting the turret, aligning the bipod. Click, adjust, breathe, every motion precise, deliberate, controlled. Weber hated that calm. It unnerved him. "You think that rifle listens to good intentions?" he sneered. "That thing weighs more than your optimism." Still, she said nothing. Her world had narrowed the moment, the wind, the weight of the weapon beneath her cheek. Her pulse was steady. The rest of the world, including Weber's voice, dissolved into background noise like static. Somewhere down the line, a young recruit whispered, "She's ignoring him." Another laughed, "Maybe she's scared." But they were wrong. She wasn't scared, she was remembering. A different wind, a different mountain, the sound of her own breath echoing through a headset while someone's life hung in the crosshairs. That memory had never left her. It didn't scream, it whispered, and that whisper was louder than any insult. Colonel Foss, watching from the command tower, noticed what others didn't. The way she set her scope, not too fast, not too hesitant. The way she exhaled, long and shallow, aligning with the pulse of the wind itself. He'd seen that stillness before. In the world's most dangerous corners, it wasn't weakness. It was the silence before something extraordinary. Weber moved down the line, checking the other shooters. His boots cracked the frost underfoot. "All right, recruits," he shouted. "Targets at 1,200 meters. Standard silhouette. Unsteady crosswinds. Let's see what you've got." Each soldier stepped forward, took aim, and fired. Some hits, many misses. Bullets drifted off course, eaten alive by the mountain wind. Weber barked corrections and grunted approval, the ritual of control that made him feel like a king. Then it was Anna's turn. The laughter quieted, replaced by a tense, curious silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Anna lay down behind her rifle, her body aligning perfectly with the ground. Her breath slowed. She closed her eyes, not to pray but to measure. The wind pressed against her cheek. She felt it, not as resistance but as data. Her gloved fingers brushed the trigger but didn't pull. She waited. A soldier coughed behind her. Weber folded his arms, smirking. She opened her eyes, and in that instant everything vanished. The world became numbers, angles, density, distance. She wasn't lying on frozen gravel anymore. She was inside the math of life and death. Half a breath. Hold. Fire. The crack of the rifle echoed like thunder down the valley. The bullet sliced the air, invisible, perfect. Seconds passed. Then came a faint metallic plink. The sound of steel struck dead center. For a moment no one moved. Then came a collective gasp, disbelief, or something raw that silenced even Weber. He raised his binoculars, stared through them, lowered them slowly. "Impossible," he muttered. But before the silence could settle, a harsh alarm ripped through the cold air. Red lights flared from the control tower. Code red, code red. The loudspeaker crackled. This is not a drill, enemy contact, real engagement, Sector Gamma 7. The air changed. The mockery, the arrogance gone. Boots slammed against the ground. Shouts, orders, the sound of weapons snapping into readiness. A patrol had been ambushed, pinned down by a hostile sniper somewhere in the rocky ridges beyond the range. Too far for standard rifles. Too dangerous for rescue. Weber tried to regain control, barking commands, but fear had replaced obedience. The soldiers were green, disoriented, and the Colonel Foss, was already moving. A helicopter roared overhead, snow spiraling like white smoke. Foss jumped out before it even fully landed, eyes sharp, expression stone-hard. A radio operator ran to him, shouting over the wind. "One sniper, sir. High ground, extreme distance, over 1,500 meters. Our men are trapped, no cover, no extraction window." Foss turned, scanning the chaos. He didn't see soldiers, he saw panic. And then, at the edge of it all, he saw her. Anna Reiter. She wasn't running. She wasn't panicking. She was looking through her scope, already calculating the terrain, reading the wind, tracing invisible lines across the mountainside. Foss walked straight toward her. Weber tried to intercept, his voice desperate. "Colonel, with respect, she's just—" Foss raised a hand. Silence. He stopped in front of her. "Sergeant," he said, voice calm, commanding, "status report." She turned her head slightly, eyes clear, unflinching. "Target located," she said. "Approximately 1,540 meters. Down angle 32 degrees. West-southwest wind, gusting 15 to 25. Target sheltered in a rock recess, visible window less than half a meter wide." Her tone was flat, analytical. It wasn't arrogance, it was focus. Weber blinked. He didn't understand half of what she said, but Foss did. He'd heard that kind of precision before in classified after-action reports, in missions that never made the news. "Get me her file," Foss ordered. A young lieutenant ran off, returning moments later with a tablet. Foss scrolled, eyes narrowing. Then he read aloud, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Unit, Special Operations Command, Task Force 14. Decorations, Iron Cross for Valor, Bundeswehr Cross of Honor in gold, Certified Expert Long-Range Anti-Material Operations, Classified Assignments, Highest Security Clearance." Silence fell. The librarian wasn't a rookie, she was a ghost, a legend, a quiet professional disguised as ordinary. Weber's face drained of color. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not fragility, but something terrifyingly composed. Colonel Foss closed the tablet and looked her in the eye. Then, in a gesture that froze the entire field, he raised his hand and saluted. Not as a superior to a subordinate, but soldier to soldier. "Sergeant," he said softly, "this is your operation. Give the order." The world seemed to stop. Weber's throat went dry. The recruits looked at each other, unsure what was happening, but Foss didn't break eye contact. Anna nodded once. No pride, no hesitation, just duty. She adjusted her scope. "Observer," she said, "wind reading." A corporal crouched beside her, hands trembling as he called out data. She processed it silently, mind a storm of math and instinct. Gravity, air density, Coriolis drift, temperature. She wasn't thinking, she was seeing. The target was invisible to everyone else, but to her it was clear. A glint of light, a faint shimmer, sunlight catching on an enemy scope. She waited. The mountain wind pulsed like a heartbeat. The frozen world held its breath. Weber stood behind her, silent now. He saw the scar on her knuckle, the chipped paint on her rifle, signs of use, of long nights no one had asked about. He realized what he'd mistaken for weakness was something far harder to name. Anna inhaled, half exhale. The world vanished again. One shot. The sound split the valley. 2 seconds later, silence. Then the faint crackle of radio static. Target down, repeat, target neutralized, were clear. The soldiers on the ridge were alive. On the firing range, no one moved. The silence wasn't shock anymore. It was reverence. Weber's mouth opened, but no words came. Foss nodded once, grim, respectful, then turned to his men. "You all just witnessed something you'll never forget," he said. "That's what real competence looks like. It doesn't shout, it doesn't boast, it just does the job." Anna didn't look up. She cycled the bolt, ejected the spent casing, and scanned the horizon again, methodical, calm. The applause that followed wasn't for her. It was for what she represented. The wind howled again, colder now. Somewhere behind her, Weber stood frozen, not humiliated but humbled. And in the echoing quiet of the mountains, one truth lingered, heavy and simple. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Why is it that silence feels heavier after applause fades? For Sergeant Anna Reiter, the mountains had fallen quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the calm before the shot, it was the calm after the storm. The kind that leaves echoes. 2 days had passed since the sniper test turned into a real engagement. The snow on the firing range had half melted, then frozen again, like memory solidifying into something permanent. The recruits were back to their routines, but something invisible had changed in the air. They still talked about her, in whispers, in awe. "Did you see her face? She didn't even blink. They say she hit a moving target at 1,500 meters. No, it was 1,600. And so the myth began to grow. Anna hated that part. Inside the armory, she worked alone, methodically cleaning her rifle. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, pale and sterile. The smell of gun oil mixed with cold metal filled the air. She didn't look up when footsteps approached. "Sergeant." It was Master Sergeant Weber. His voice, once booming and confident, was now quieter, stripped of all its sharp edges. He stopped a few feet away, helmet in hand, eyes lowered. "I owe you an apology," he said. His tone wasn't rehearsed. It was rough, genuine, like gravel in his throat. "What I said before that shot, I was wrong." Anna glanced at him briefly, then back to her rifle. Her movements never slowed. "We all make mistakes, Master Sergeant," she said evenly. "I misjudged you," he continued. "That day I saw weakness where there was strength. You saved lives, I'll remember that." She paused, wiped a thin line of oil across the barrel, then nodded. "We're all soldiers, sir. We just do what needs to be done." Weber stood silently for a moment, searching for something else to say, some way to make it right, but there wasn't one. He nodded once, turned, and left. The sound of the door closing left her alone again. She looked at the rifle in front of her, the same weapon she had carried through wind, snow, and death. To others it was a tool. To her it was memory made of steel. Every scratch told a story, every burn marked a decision. Outside, the base was alive again. Helicopters came and went. Recruits marched. And somewhere in an office above it all, Colonel Foss stood by the window, watching her cross the courtyard below. He'd seen soldiers come and go, brave, reckless, broken, but Reiter was different. There was something in her silence that unsettled him. It wasn't pride. It wasn't humility. It was something deeper, the kind of quiet that comes from carrying too much for too long. When the call came from higher command, Foss didn't hesitate. "She's being reassigned," said the voice on the other end. "Task Force 14 is reactivating for a special operation. They've requested her by name." "By name?" Foss asked. "That's unusual." "She's still one of theirs, Colonel. She just forgot that for a while." The line went dead. That night he found her outside, sitting on a concrete step near the hangars. The sky was clear, millions of stars, sharp and distant. She wasn't looking at them. Her gaze was fixed on her hands, resting on her knees, calloused and scarred. "Sergeant," Foss said, standing beside her. She didn't turn, "Sir." "They're calling you back," he said softly. "Task Force 14, it's official." She was quiet for a moment. When? 48 hours. She nodded once. No surprise, no protest, just quiet acceptance. He studied her profile, the calm, unreadable face that hid more than it revealed. You've done enough for one lifetime, Reiter. You don't have to keep proving anything. She smiled faintly, but it wasn't joy. I'm not proving anything, sir. I'm just finishing what I started. He wanted to ask what that meant, but her eyes, cold, reflective, far away, told him she wasn't talking about the mission. When she walked away that night, the sound of her boots faded into the wind. Foss watched her go, knowing he might never see her again. The new assignment was different. No barracks chatter, no laughter, no audience. The transport plane roared low over the Mediterranean before cutting inland. The landscape changed: jagged, sun-bleached mountains, scattered villages, long shadows cast by a setting sun. Anna sat near the back, eyes closed beneath the dull red light. Across from her sat 3 men, operators, quiet and built for silence like her. They knew her reputation, but no one spoke it aloud. In the field, rank didn't matter. Results did. The mission briefing had been brief. An intelligence asset deep behind enemy lines had gone dark. The extraction route was compromised. Satellite images showed hostile movement near the ridge. She'd been chosen for Overwatch. To them, she was the long eye, the invisible guardian. When they landed on a makeshift dirt strip at dusk, the heat still clung to the earth. The team moved quickly, no light, no chatter. Anna's pack was heavier than most, but she carried it with the quiet endurance of someone who'd carried worse. They hiked through the night, rocky trails, shifting shadows. Every sound mattered: a pebble rolling, the wind cutting through dry grass. Out here, silence wasn't an absence. It was communication. At 300 hours, they reached the ridge. Below, in the moonlight, a cluster of half-ruined stone buildings lay hidden among the rocks, the extraction point. Anna set up her rifle on the crest, her world shrinking again to the glass of her scope. Her breathing slowed. Her pulse disappeared into the rhythm of the wind. Through the lens, she saw them, figures moving in the shadows, flashlights flickering briefly before cutting out. Not soldiers, hunters. Contact, she whispered over comms. 3 hostiles approaching from southeast ridge, 2 more flanking. The team below acknowledged in silence, quick hand signals, a reposition. She adjusted the scope, calculated the wind. A heartbeat later, a single shot cracked through the night, hers. 1 man dropped before he could raise his weapon. The others froze, searching for a ghost that wasn't there. Another shot. Then another. Clean, efficient, precise. The firefight that followed was short, brutal, chaotic, but the team got out. The asset was alive, extraction complete. When the helicopter lifted them from the dust, Anna sat again at the edge, watching the ground disappear beneath her boots. The wind hit her face, carrying the smell of sand and gunpowder. She didn't smile, she didn't speak, she just watched. Back at base, reports came in. Mission success, 0 friendly casualties, high-value recovery confirmed. Her name appeared nowhere in the official summary. It never did. Later, in her small quarters, she placed her rifle against the wall and sat on the floor beside it. For a long time, she said nothing. The sound of a fan hummed overhead. Somewhere outside, laughter echoed faintly from the mess hall, young voices, easy and free. She envied them. On her bedside table lay an old photograph worn at the edges. 2 people in uniform, smiling, wind in their hair. One of them was her. The other, a man gone years ago. His name was never spoken on base anymore, but she remembered, always. That was why she stayed quiet, why she kept moving. Because the dead never left. They just waited for you to stop pretending. She looked at the photo, touched the corner gently, and whispered, "We made the shot." Her voice cracked, the first sound of emotion in days. Then she straightened, wiped her eyes, and returned to silence. The next morning, a message arrived sealed, encrypted, simple. New orders, different location, same team. As she folded the paper, she noticed a line written in pen beneath the printed text. It wasn't regulation. It was personal. Your legend is growing, Reiter, but legends are heavy things to carry. No signature, she didn't need one. She stared at the words for a long time. Then she smiled faintly, not from pride, but from understanding. Because legends didn't live in stories. They lived in the quiet moments no one saw, the times you chose duty over peace and silence over applause. Outside, the sun was rising. She stepped into it, the light cold, thin, and clear. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't even sure she wanted to be remembered. But as the wind brushed against her cheek and the world filled with that familiar stillness again, she realized something simple, something she'd always known but never said aloud. Courage doesn't roar, it whispers. And sometimes it whispers through you. How do you keep your hands steady when your heart doesn't agree with the mission? That was the question echoing in Sergeant Anna Reiter's mind, as the convoy crawled through the dust-choked valley toward the next assignment. The hum of the engine filled the silence between the operators. No music, no chatter, only the rhythmic thrum of wheels against dirt, the heartbeat of men and women who had learned that quiet was safer than words. The terrain was different now, not the frozen stillness of the Alps, but arid, endless hills that shimmered under a cruel sun. The kind of place where war wasn't about borders or politics. It was about shadows, about people disappearing, one mission at a time. Her new orders were brief, as always. Overwatch and neutralize any hostile interference during a humanitarian extraction. But when she read the fine print, she saw the pattern. The same covert insignia, the same coded references to operations she had once walked away from. It wasn't rescue, it was silence dressed in paperwork. She looked out the window, her reflection flickering in the glass, sunburnt, hollow-eyed, unreadable. She didn't know if she was still fighting for the same reason she joined, or if she was just too good at it to stop. The radio crackled, approaching Zone Echo 7, one click out. She nodded, adjusted her rifle, checked her scope, not because it needed checking, but because it grounded her. Beside her sat Lieutenant Ramey, the youngest in the team. His uniform was still too new, his eyes too alive. "You ever get used to it?" he asked suddenly. She glanced at him. Used to what? The waiting. The part where you don't know if what you're doing is saving people or something else. Her jaw tightened. "No," she said quietly. "You don't get used to that, you just learn to live with it." The words hung between them, heavy and unfinished. Moments later, the convoy halted. Dust swirled in golden waves as the soldiers disembarked. The valley below stretched wide and silent, a ghost town carved from stone, crumbling houses, empty courtyards, a single road cutting through the desolation like a scar. "Reiter, take over watch," came the order. She moved without a word, climbing the ridge to her designated position. The climb was steep, her boots crunching against gravel. The sun burned against her neck, but she didn't slow. At the top, she dropped prone, rifle in position, eyes scanning the horizon through the shimmering heat. And then she saw them. 3 figures moving in the far distance near the ruins of a mosque, too precise, too deliberate, not locals. "Contact bearing 125, range 1100 meters," she whispered into her comm. "Confirm hostility." Negative visual confirmation, but their pattern, it's tactical. The command line went quiet. Then a familiar voice came through, the field controller, Major Krantz, cold, detached. "Hold fire until confirmed." She tracked the figures through her scope. One raised binoculars. The sunlight glinted off glass, a flash of intent. "Permission to engage," she said. "Denied," Krantz replied. "Maintain overwatch." Her finger hovered near the trigger. The voice in her ear faded under the roar of instinct. She had seconds. The glint moved again, this time lower, deliberate. She fired. The sound rolled across the valley. Through the scope, she saw the figure drop instantly, the others scattering. "Shot fired," she said, calm. The radio erupted. "Reiter, who authorized that?" She didn't answer. She was already shifting position, scanning for movement. And then she saw something that made her chest tighten, a thin trail of smoke rising from behind one of the broken walls. It wasn't gunfire, it was a signal. And it wasn't coming from an enemy. "Sir," she said sharply, "those weren't hostiles, that was a signal flare." Static filled the channel. Then Krantz's voice again, colder, clipped. "Disregard that. Mission continues. Proceed with extraction." She froze. "Say again." "Proceed, Sergeant. Do not engage. Do not deviate from protocol." She stared through the scope again, pulse quickening. The fallen figure was motionless, civilian clothes, not a uniform, a young man, barely 20. Her stomach twisted. She switched channels, whispering to the lieutenant below. "Raimi, the targets, they weren't armed. They were signaling something's wrong." Silence, then "Copy that." But before he could say more, the world erupted. A distant explosion tore through the valley, a plume of fire rising behind the convoy. The shockwave rolled across the ridge, slamming dust into her face. "Ambush, South Ridge, move, move," voices screamed through comms. She swung her scope. The signal flare was a decoy. The real attack was coming from the opposite ridge. Precision fire, coordinated. Her heart clenched. "Raimi, get down." She spotted the muzzle flash. Without hesitation, she fired. One shot, then another, then a third. Each impact silenced a weapon one by one until the valley was still again. When it was over, she sat back, breath ragged, eyes burning from the dust. The radio was chaos, medics calling for stretchers, officers shouting coordinates. Then she heard it, Foss's voice, calm, firm, somehow even now it steadied her. "Reiter status." "Overwatch intact," she said, forcing her breathing even. "Ambush neutralized, casualties unknown. Return to base, debrief in 30. The line went silent. Back at the Forward Operations Center, the air smelled of smoke and adrenaline. Soldiers moved like ghosts, bandaged, exhausted, muttering. Anna sat in the debrief room, helmet on the table, hands still trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the aftermath of restraint. The door opened. Major Krantz stepped in, file in hand. Foss followed, silent, his expression unreadable. Krantz didn't sit. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. "You fired without confirmation and compromised the mission." Anna met his gaze. "I saw intent, sir. If I hadn't taken the shot, we'd have lost the convoy." Krantz's jaw tightened. "And instead, you killed a civilian." The room fell silent. Foss said nothing. Anna's throat went dry. "That's not." "Enough," Krantz snapped. "We'll review the footage. Until then, you're grounded." He left, slamming the door behind him. Foss stayed, looking at her for a long time. "You trust your instincts," he said finally. "That's what makes you effective." She nodded, "But it costs someone their life." He sighed. "In this line of work, there's no such thing as clean hands, Reiter." She looked away, her voice almost a whisper. "Maybe that's the problem." That night she couldn't sleep. The base generator hummed outside her quarters, steady and indifferent. She sat on her bunk, staring at her hands, the same ones that had saved lives and taken them. The boy's face wouldn't leave her mind. Not because of guilt, she'd learned to live with guilt, but because of the way his body fell. There was no weapon, no warning. She replayed the footage in her head again and again, until it blurred into static. Then came the knock. It was Raimi. He stood in the doorway holding a sealed drive. "This was pulled from the recon drone," he said quietly. "You should see it." She hesitated, then took it. The screen flickered to life, aerial footage of the valley, moments before the engagement. 3 figures, civilian movement, then the flare. Then the gunfire from the other ridge. Her chest went cold. She hadn't fired on hostiles. She'd fired on bait. And the worst part, someone had known. She leaned back, exhaling sharply. They set it up. Raymai frowned. Who? She looked up at him, eyes hollow but steady. Our own command. They needed justification for the strike. The ambush wasn't a surprise, it was permission. He swallowed hard. What do we do? She closed the laptop slowly. We don't do anything, not yet. Because in her world, truth was just another kind of weapon, and you didn't fire it until you were sure of your target. Hours later, she walked the empty airstrip. The night wind was cold, carrying the faint hum of generators. She looked at the stars, silent witnesses to all the things soldiers could never say. Somewhere in the dark, she whispered to no one. Justice and obedience can't live in the same room. And then, after a pause, a faint, bitter smile crossed her lips. But I've lived in worse places. Her shadow stretched long against the tarmac as the first light crept over the horizon. A soldier caught between duty and conscience, and beginning to realize that the next battle wouldn't be fought in the field, but inside her own silence. What happens when the truth you uncover is one you were trained to ignore? For Sergeant Anna Reiter, that question had stopped being philosophical. It had become survival. The next morning the base was quieter than usual. Too quiet. No drills, no chatter, no laughter. Just the hollow wind rolling through the compound like a ghost that knew everyone's name. Anna stood at the edge of the firing range, the same place where she had once silenced mockery with a single perfect shot. The snow from that day was gone, replaced now by dust and heat. Yet somehow, the air felt just as cold. She looked through her scope again, not at a target but at her own reflection in the lens. The face staring back at her wasn't the one she remembered. There were lines now, small but deep, a tiredness that couldn't be washed away by sleep or steel. Behind her, footsteps crunched. She didn't turn. You should be resting, Colonel Foss said softly. She lowered the rifle and straightened. Rest doesn't help, sir. He studied her for a moment. You saw the footage. I did. And... Her jaw tightened. We were lied to. Foss exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. It's never that simple. Yes, sir, it is, she replied quietly. We fired first. We justified a massacre that didn't need to happen. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. He looked away toward the horizon. You think this is the first time? That stopped her. I've been in this uniform long enough to know, he continued, that command doesn't always tell us everything. Sometimes they don't even tell themselves. The mission becomes the truth, and the truth becomes classified. She frowned, so we just live with it. His eyes met hers, weary, honest. We survive with it. That's all most of us can do. But Anna wasn't most of them. She nodded once respectfully, but inside something had shifted. A quiet rebellion had started, and it didn't need an army. It only needed a conscience. That night she found Raymai in the comms tent, eyes darting nervously between screens. They're scrubbing the drone footage, he whispered. Command ordered a full wipe. I barely managed to copy what we had. Anna's stomach sank. They're covering it up. He nodded. And they're pinning it on you. Her pulse quickened. What? Raymai handed her a data slate. On the screen was an official draft report. Unauthorized engagement by Sergeant Reiter resulted in civilian casualty. Incident under disciplinary review. It was already stamped with clearance seals. Already written. Already truth, before it was even spoken. She stared at it, her fingers tightening. They want a scapegoat. Raymai's voice shook. If this goes through, you'll be discharged, maybe worse. Anna's mind ran cold, not with fear but calculation. Who signed this? He hesitated. Major Krantz. Of course. She took a deep breath, forcing the tremor from her voice. Delete this version, copy the original data to a secure drive, hide it somewhere off-network. Raymai hesitated. That's treason, Anna. No, she said quietly, that's survival. He stared at her, torn between fear and loyalty. Finally, he nodded. I'll take care of it. When he was gone, she sat alone in the dark tent. The hum of the equipment filled the silence. The soft flicker of a monitor washed over her face like the light of a confession booth. She'd spent years mastering silence, learning when to hold it, when to weaponize it. But this was different. This was the kind of silence that could erase her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to break it. The next day, the summons came. A formal inquiry. The small operations room had been stripped of everything personal. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a recorder. Krantz sat opposite her, the polished cold of authority etched into every line of his uniform. "Sergeant," he began, "you disobeyed orders, discharged your weapon without command approval, and compromised the mission. Do you dispute any of that?" She looked at him calmly. "I fired because I saw a threat." He leaned forward, and yet the only confirmed casualty was an unarmed civilian. Anna's eyes didn't move, because someone put him there. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Krantz's expression hardened. "You're implying deliberate manipulation. Do you have evidence?" She didn't answer. "Sergeant," he pressed, "if you're suggesting command orchestrated this incident, I suggest you think very carefully about the next words out of your mouth." Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. She could lie, stay quiet, survive. Instead, she said, "I have drone footage. It shows the ambush was pre-planned." Krantz's jaw flexed. He tried to mask it, but she saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. "Where is this footage?" he asked evenly. She met his gaze. "Safe." He stood slowly, smoothing his uniform. "You're walking a dangerous line, Sergeant." She rose too. "So are you, sir." They stared at each other, predator and prey, though neither could tell who was which. Then Krantz smiled, small, cold. "You won't like what happens next." He walked out, leaving her alone with the weight of her words. By nightfall, the base had turned against her. Small things at first, glances, whispers, missing reports. Her access card suddenly required additional clearance. Her comms terminal was under maintenance. It was how they erased people, slowly, professionally. She packed light, her rifle, her notes, the encrypted drive Raymai had hidden for her. He met her by the loading dock, face pale under the floodlights. "They'll notice you're gone," he said. "They'll notice when I stop being quiet," she replied. He swallowed. "Where will you go?" She looked toward the horizon, where the desert met the night sky. "Somewhere they don't control the story." He hesitated, then handed her a small envelope. Inside was a photo, her and the team from the Alps, the day of the first shot. He smiled weakly. "Thought you'd want to remember who you were before all this." She didn't trust her voice enough to answer. She just nodded, slipped the photo into her pocket and walked away. The helicopter that took her out of the compound didn't file a flight plan. It lifted quietly into the darkness, swallowed by the desert wind. Hours later, she arrived at a forward outpost, an old NATO relay station half buried in sand. It wasn't on any active maps. Foss had used it once during a classified op years ago. He had mentioned it once offhand as a memory. She had remembered. Inside, the generators still worked. The equipment was old but alive. She connected the encrypted drive and watched as the drone footage filled the screens, grainy, silent proof of everything they'd done. The evidence was clear: the false signal, the hidden shooters, the timing of the ambush, all choreographed, all intentional. She leaned back, heart pounding. She had enough here to end careers, maybe even topple operations. But it wouldn't matter if no one believed her. And in this world, truth without power was just noise. Her radio hissed suddenly, static, then a voice: "Foss. Reiter, are you there?" She froze, sir. His voice was low, urgent. You need to leave that station, now. Her pulse spiked. They found me. Not yet, but they will. Krantz filed a black warrant. You're being listed as AWOL with classified theft. That's a death sentence in the field. She gritted her teeth. So I just run. No, Foss said. You move smart. Upload what you have to this channel. The line crackled, then died. She tried reconnecting, but the signal was gone. For a moment the silence pressed down on her like gravity. Alone, betrayed, surrounded by the ghosts of missions that never existed. She looked at the drive again, the truth flickering across the screens like the heartbeat of something dangerous. Then she did what she'd always done best. She made a decision. She pulled the drive, pocketed it, and shut down the relay systems. Outside, the horizon was burning faintly with dawn. As she stepped into the light, the wind carried the faint sound of rotors, distant, growing. They were coming. She climbed to the ridge, rifle slung across her back. Each step was deliberate, quiet. Below her, the desert stretched endlessly, a landscape that erased everything, even guilt. She whispered to herself, steadying her breath. If silence is survival, then I'll survive my way. The helicopter appeared dark, unmarked, slicing through the early sun. She chambered around, eyes narrowing. For the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for orders. She was the order. And somewhere deep inside the noise of her own heartbeat, the voice of her past echoed, soft, patient, unafraid. Sometimes the only way to serve justice is to disobey it. How long can silence protect you before it starts to bury you? For Sergeant Anna Reiter, silence had always been armor. But now, out here, in the wasteland between loyalty and exile, it began to sound like guilt. 3 days since she disappeared. 3 days of moving at night, sleeping by day, never staying in one place long enough to leave footprints. The desert had changed her rhythm. She ate when she could, slept with one eye open, drank water that tasted like rust and dust. The sun had peeled the color from her skin, the wind from her voice. Every soldier learns how to vanish, but only the guilty learn how to stay gone. She crouched under the broken frame of an abandoned watchtower, rifle across her knees, listening to the faint hum of distant rotors. They were still searching. Her own brothers in arms hunting her now. She checked the satellite radio again. Static, always static. Then, for the first time in days, a voice broke through. Anna, you there? It's me, Raymai. Her heart stopped for half a beat. She turned the dial slowly, amplifying the signal. Raymai, how did you? His voice came back, strained, breathless. They know about the footage. They raided my quarters. I barely got out. They're saying you stole classified intel. I didn't steal anything, she whispered. I preserved the truth. Doesn't matter, he said. Krantz wants it gone. He wants you gone. Silence filled the channel for a moment. Then Raymai's voice dropped, urgent. They took Foss. Her blood ran cold. What? They're holding him at the logistics outpost near the canyon road. Said he helped you. They're interrogating him now. She swallowed hard, forcing her breath steady. How far? About 80 clicks from your last ping, but Anna, it's a trap. They know you'll come. She smiled faintly, a tired, bitter thing. Then they're finally right about something. By sunset, she was moving again, light, silent, invisible. The desert stretched out before her in waves of gold fatting to red. Her boots sank softly into the sand as she moved through dry creek beds and ancient rock formations carved by wind and time. Each step felt heavier, not from fatigue but from memory. She remembered the first time she'd met Foss, the way he had seen her, really seen her, when no one else did. He had believed in her silence when others mocked it. Now that silence was the reason he might die. The canyon appeared just after midnight, a gash in the earth, deep and narrow, filled with shadow. From above she could see the faint glow of a floodlight. Trucks, Guards, movement. She found a ridge, lay flat and raised her scope. Two guards patrolling the perimeter. A single prefab building at the center, windowless metal walls. Inside she saw movement. A silhouette sitting, head bowed. Foss. She exhaled slowly. "Got you," she whispered. She counted positions. 3 vehicles, 6 hostiles minimum, maybe more inside. Her odds weren't good, but odds had never stopped her before. She waited patient, calculating. She tracked the guards' routes, timed the lights, felt the wind shift. Then when the rotation aligned, she moved. A shadow slipping through shadows. She descended the slope without sound, boots pressing into loose sand. Every movement was a decision, every breath, a negotiation with chance. At 30 meters she stopped. A guard turned, she froze. The silence stretched like wire. Then the wind picked up, tossing dust between them. He squinted, turned away. She moved again, closer, until the metal walls loomed over her. She placed a small charge at the rear panel, silent, directional, precise. When it blew, it wouldn't shatter. It would whisper. She crouched low, pressed the detonator, and the panel slid open with a muted pop. Inside, the light was dim, flickering. Foss sat in a chair, wrists bound, head lowered but conscious. His face was bruised. A guard stood near him, back turned, scrolling on a tablet. Anna raised her pistol, one suppressed shot. The man fell without a sound. "Colonel," she whispered, stepping forward. Foss lifted his head slowly. His eyes widened, disbelief, then relief. "You shouldn't have come." "I could not," she said. "You're the only one left who—" The words died in her throat. Behind him, a red light blinked faintly on the ceiling, a camera. Active. She turned, saw the small lens glinting, and then the speaker above it crackled. "Welcome back, Sergeant Reiter." Krantz's voice, calm, controlled. Her stomach turned to ice. "You really are predictable," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "I was beginning to think you lost your nerve." Foss struggled in his chair. "Anna, go." Krantz cut him off. "No, please stay. We've been waiting for the famous ghost to show herself. You've caused quite the mess." Anna lifted her rifle, scanning the corners. "Where are you, Krantz?" "Oh, not far," he said smoothly. "And don't bother running, the canyon's sealed, you're surrounded." She backed toward Foss, eyes scanning for exits. "Why do all this?" "You really don't see it, do you?" Krantz said. "You think you exposed corruption, but you just exposed how little one soldier matters in the scale of war." He paused. "We don't hide truth, Reiter. We manage it. We decide what the world is ready to know. You're just noise." Anna's jaw tightened. Noise can still break glass. She fired one clean shot. The camera exploded in a flash of sparks. "Let's move," she said, cutting Foss's restraints. He stood slowly, wincing. "You always had a terrible habit of being right too late." "Better late than never." They slipped out the rear panel just as floodlights flared across the compound. Shouts followed, boots pounding, radios crackling. Anna led Foss into the ravine, using the jagged rock walls as cover. Bullets sparked against the stone. She ducked, returned fire, quick, precise bursts that cut through the chaos like punctuation marks. "Keep moving," she shouted. They reached a narrow slope. Foss stumbled, clutching his ribs. "Go, I'll slow you down." She shook her head. "I didn't come this far to leave you." Then a spotlight caught them, harsh, white, unrelenting. Krantz's voice echoed again, closer this time. "End of the line, Sergeant. Drop the weapon." She turned, shielding Foss, eyes narrowing into the light. Krantz stepped out from behind a vehicle, flanked by armed soldiers. His uniform was immaculate, untouched by the dirt of his own orders. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he said. "You've compromised operations that protect millions. You think you've seen evil, you've seen strategy." Anna lowered her rifle slowly. "Strategy doesn't use corpses as camouflage." He smiled. Idealism looks charming on you, Sergeant, but this isn't about morality, it's about control. He nodded to his men. Take her. She hesitated just long enough. Then, with one breath, she turned and fired at the floodlight. The world plunged into darkness. Shouts, confusion, gunfire. She grabbed Foss's arm and pulled him down the slope. They slid behind a broken truck, bullets tearing through the sand above them. She checked her mag, one round left. Foss met her gaze, grim understanding. You always did like impossible odds. She smirked faintly. It's a theme. She turned, sighted through the darkness, one shot, perfectly aimed. It struck the fuel line of a nearby generator. The explosion lit the canyon like sunrise. Heat, dust, silence. When the smoke cleared, Krantz was gone, thrown by the blast, maybe dead, maybe not. Anna stood shakily, lungs burning. Foss leaned on her shoulder. They stumbled through the chaos toward the ridge, away from the wreckage. At the top, they collapsed behind a boulder, gasping. Below them, the outpost burned. The sky pulsed orange. Foss coughed, voice raw. You've just declared war on your own command. She stared at the fire. Then they should have thought twice before making me their enemy. He looked at her, pride flickering behind the exhaustion. What now? She watched the flames flicker, painting her face in shadow and light. Now. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the encrypted drive. It was cracked, dented, but intact. We tell the world, she said, all of it. Foss nodded slowly. You'll make powerful enemies. She gave a small, tired smile. Then I'll keep doing what I do best. He frowned. What's that? She looked at him, eyes steady, voice quiet but unyielding. Staying unseen and hitting what everyone else misses. The wind picked up again, carrying the faint sound of crackling fire. In that glow, she didn't look like a fugitive. She looked like something else, something the system had created but couldn't contain. A reckoning wrapped in silence. Later, when the night finally swallowed the flames, she walked alone to the edge of the ridge. Foss slept nearby, exhausted. She looked down at the valley, at what used to be an outpost, now nothing more than smoke and memory. And in that silence, she finally spoke, not to the dead, not to the living, but to the part of herself she'd kept locked away. You were right, she whispered. Silence isn't peace. It's just waiting for someone to listen. The stars didn't answer, but the wind shifted, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't sound like loneliness. It sounded like purpose. When you run long enough, you forget what you're running toward. You only remember what you're running from. For Sergeant Anna Reiter, the world had become a map of safe houses and shadows. Every border she crossed erased her name a little more. It had been 4 months since the canyon. 4 months since she and Colonel Foss vanished from every military registry. Officially, they didn't exist. Unofficially, they were the story no one wanted told. The encrypted drive had changed hands a dozen times since then, traded, hidden, copied, scattered across continents like fragments of truth that refused to die. And in those 4 months, something strange happened. The silence began to crack. Whispers spread through underground networks, anonymous footage, classified files, coded transmissions. Someone was leaking the truth. And the name tied to those leaks was hers. They were in Montenegro now, living under borrowed names. A coastal town that clung to the cliffs, all salt air and broken tiles. Foss moved slowly these days, his injuries from the canyon still raw beneath the bandages. Anna had rented a small apartment above a boat repair shop. It smelled of oil and seaweed, but it was quiet. Every morning she sat by the window, watching fishing boats crawl toward the horizon. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to just breathe. No uniforms. No orders. No noise. But peace, she learned, was just silence wearing a disguise. One evening, Foss found her sitting at the edge of the dock, rifle across her lap, eyes lost in the reflection of the moon on the water. "You still sleep with that thing?" he asked softly. She half smiled. "Old habits." He sat beside her, wincing as his ribs protested. "You don't have to be a soldier anymore, Anna." She didn't answer. The night breeze tugged at her hair, carrying the distant sound of church bells. "Do you miss it?" he asked. She thought for a long moment. "No," she said finally, "but I miss who I thought I was when I started." Foss nodded slowly. "The idealist." "The fool," she corrected. He chuckled softly. "Same thing at the beginning." They sat in silence, two ghosts watching the tide roll in. After a while, Foss reached into his jacket and handed her a folded piece of paper. "Got this from a contact in Warsaw," he said. She opened it, a printed headline in a small foreign newspaper. "Leaked documents reveal military cover-up in Gamma operations." Below it a blurred photo, her shot from the range. The woman behind the scope, anonymous, but recognizable enough. Her stomach tightened. "How?" He shrugged. "Someone's moving your story." "It wasn't supposed to be about me," she said quietly. "It never is," Foss replied. "But symbols have gravity. They pull attention whether they want it or not." She folded the paper carefully as if it might break. "They'll come for us again." He nodded. "They already are." 2 nights later the knock came. 3 short taps, not local police, not a neighbor. Trained rhythm. Controlled. Anna's hand went instantly to her weapon. She moved to the door, silent, and peeked through the small crack of light. A figure stood outside, familiar posture, young, nervous. She opened the door. "Raymai." He exhaled in relief, lowering his hood. "Finally found you." She pulled him inside quickly, locking the door behind them. Foss appeared from the next room, eyes narrowing. "God, kid," Foss muttered, "you look like hell." Raymai smiled weakly. "Feels mutual." He dropped a small pack on the table, unzipped it, and pulled out a tablet. "They're planning something big," he said. "Krantz didn't die in the explosion. He's alive, and he's building a narrative to bury everything. They're calling you a traitor working with foreign agencies." Anna's jaw clenched. Classic misdirection. "There's more," he said, swiping across the screen. A map appeared, Europe dotted with red markers. "They're activating a task group to find you, and Foss, and anyone tied to the leaks." She leaned closer. "Who's leading it?" Raymai hesitated. "Krantz, and he's not alone. He's got backing from Intel, full resources." The room went quiet. Foss rubbed his temple. "We can't outrun an entire system." "Then we don't run," Anna said. Foss looked at her sharply. "What are you thinking?" She turned toward the window, the dark sea stretching endlessly beyond. "We make them chase us into the light." Raymai frowned. "Meaning?" "We release everything. All the data, all the files, not to a network, to everyone. Public, unstoppable." "That's suicide," Foss said. "They'll hunt you in the open." She met his gaze, calm, resolved. "They're already hunting me. At least this way I choose the battlefield." He studied her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure it's a good one." They spent the next 48 hours underground, literally. An old Cold War bunker beneath the boatyard became their command post. Dust thick on the consoles, walls etched with names of soldiers long gone. Raymai worked the network, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Foss coordinated safe links and contact relays, his voice steady despite the pain. Anna watched over them both, packing like a restless ghost, checking every noise. By dawn, the first phase was ready, encrypted dumps uploaded to mirror servers across Europe. The truth was no longer a file, it was a fuse. Then the signal cut out. Raymai froze. "That's not possible, we're firewalled." Anna moved beside him. "What happened?" He tapped rapidly, panic rising. They found us. Someone traced the upload. They're breaching the network now. Foss cursed under his breath. How long? Minutes, maybe less. Anna grabbed her pack, checked her sidearm. Pull the drives, we move. But before they could, the bunker lights flickered, then died. Total darkness. A low hum filled the air, a generator outside coming to life. Then footsteps. Foss whispered, "They're here." Anna moved to the corner, eyes adjusting. Through the crack of the steel door, she saw flashlights sweeping the stairwell. Tactical pattern. 6 men, maybe 8. Raymai's voice shook. "We can't fight them." "No," she said softly, "but we can distract them." She motioned toward the secondary exit, an old ventilation shaft half-collapsed near the rear wall. "You and Foss go. I'll hold them long enough to buy time." Foss grabbed her arm. "Anna, no." She looked at him, steady, certain. "Sir, you taught me to finish what I start." He stared at her for a long second, then nodded, the kind of nod soldiers give when words won't fit. Raymai hesitated. "You'll die." She smiled faintly. "Not if I shoot first." They slipped into the shaft as the first door blew inward. The shockwave sent dust and shards of concrete across the room. Anna rolled behind a pillar, rifle raised. Shouts filled the darkness. "Contact front." She fired twice, controlled bursts that echoed like punctuation. A man dropped, another, then silence. The others hesitated, unsure. She used it, moved positions, circled, fired again. The echo made it sound like a dozen shooters. But numbers don't lie. They began to close in. She felt the wall at her back, cold and final. Her ammo was low, her breathing sharp. Then, in the brief pause between gunfire, her radio crackled. Foss's voice. "We're clear, exfil point secured." She closed her eyes, smiled faintly. "Copy that." She pulled the last grenade from her belt, thumbed the pin halfway, and waited. When the next shadow moved through the doorway, she threw it, not to kill, but to blind. The flash lit the room in white fire. She ran through the smoke, up the corridor, heart pounding. Outside, the early light burned across the sea. She reached the ridge just as a helicopter lifted off, Foss and Raymai aboard. She waved once. Foss saw her, raised his hand just for a second. Then they were gone. She turned back toward the bunker. The soldiers were regrouping, moving fast. Anna Reiter shouldered her rifle, drew a breath that felt like the end and the beginning at once, and vanished into the smoke. Hours later, in a safe house 2 countries away, Foss watched the upload complete. Every document, every file, every image released into the wild. News feeds exploded across continents. The Gamma operation. The cover-ups. The false intelligence. And one anonymous voice recording attached to the final file. "I was there. I was ordered to stay silent. Silence protects power, not truth. I choose the latter. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what we do after the noise fades." Foss leaned back, eyes wet, whispering to himself, "Well done, Reiter." No one ever found her body. No confirmation, no photo, no closure. Just rumors. Some said she was killed in Montenegro. Others claimed she slipped across the border and disappeared into the Caucasus, training civilian volunteers. A few believed she was still alive, watching, waiting. But among soldiers, her story spread like an oath. At firing ranges, recruits still whispered her name. At briefings, officers still quoted her line, not from any speech, but from a quiet transmission caught by an operator months later, just before she vanished completely. A voice, calm and steady through the static. "If I ever fire again, it won't be at a target. It'll be at a lie." And somewhere in a place no map dared mark, a woman sat alone by a fire, the desert wind curling around her. Her rifle leaned beside her knee, silent, loyal. She looked up at the night sky. the same stars she'd once watched through a sniper's scope, and whispered a truth that no one would ever record. Maybe silence was never my weapon. Maybe it was my wound. The firelight flickered across her face, half in shadow, half in peace. And as dawn broke, slow, gold, unhurried, she closed her eyes and finally, for the first time in a very long time, exhaled without aiming. How far can one whisper travel? No one ever taught that in training. But the day the leaks went public, the world learned. The first upload hit the web at dawn. By noon, it had been mirrored 1,000 times. By midnight, 1,000,000. And somewhere in that flood of data and disbelief, the story of Operation Gamma, the buried truth, clawed its way into daylight. The footage was raw, unpolished, devastating. Drone images, internal memos, voice transcripts of soldiers questioning orders that never made sense. And one name repeated through it all: Reiter. To governments, she became a ghost to condemn. To soldiers, she became a myth to remember. Headlines split across continents. Whistleblower exposes military fabrications. Hero or traitor, the mystery of Sergeant Anna Reiter. The shot that started a revolution. And as the talking heads argued, as ministers deflected, as military spokesmen spun narratives of rogue operators, something unexpected happened. Silence began to crumble inside the ranks. In barracks and outposts around the world, soldiers started to talk. Not loudly, not publicly, but enough. A lieutenant in Poland refused to sign an altered report. A medic in Mali leaked the names of civilian casualties, omitted from an after-action summary. A logistics officer in the UK resigned after uncovering falsified orders. None of them mentioned her name. They didn't have to. She had become the unspoken permission to tell the truth. In a cafe in Lisbon, Colonel Foss sat by a window, a cup of coffee going cold in front of him. He had aged years and months, the kind of aging that came from surviving more than life ever promised. Across from him sat Raimi, hunched over a laptop, scrolling through endless feeds. "It's everywhere," he murmured. "They can't contain it anymore." Foss nodded, watching the reflection of passing cars in the glass. "Good." "They're still hunting her," Raimi said quietly. "Interpol has her listed under 3 aliases. No photo, just a red tag, classified threat level, internal security risk." Foss didn't react. He stirred his coffee slowly. "You think she's alive?" Raimi hesitated. "Don't you?" The older man looked up, eyes distant. "I've stopped needing to know. Some people die once, others fade into legend." Raimi smirked. "Sounds poetic for a colonel." He smiled faintly. "That's the trouble with age, son. You start finding poetry where you used to find orders." He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper, and handed it across. Raimi unfolded it. A printout of a photo, blurry, low resolution. A woman sitting on a ridge somewhere in North Africa, sunset behind her. The caption: "Unconfirmed sighting of the Gamma sniper." Raimi looked up. "When was this taken?" 2 weeks ago, Foss said. "Satellite recon picked it up during a joint patrol. They didn't recognize her. I did." Raimi studied the image, the silhouette alone against the desert. A rifle beside her, but no visible insignia. No flag. "She's watching," Foss said quietly. "Not hiding, watching." Raimi frowned. "What for?" Foss leaned back. "For the world to decide what kind of story it wants to be." Half a world away, the consequences began to bloom. A parliamentary hearing in Berlin demanded full disclosure of Gamma operations. In Washington, an emergency committee quietly dissolved 3 special task forces with overlapping jurisdictions. And in an isolated compound outside Ankara, a man named Krantz watched the news in silence. His left arm still bore the scars from the canyon explosion. His face, once polished with command, was now hardened with bitterness. "They turned her into a saint," he muttered. A younger officer nearby shifted nervously. "Sir, the narrative's changing faster than we can manage. Public pressure." "Public pressure is a balloon," Krantz interrupted coldly. "All it takes is one pin." He turned off the screen, eyes narrowing. "Find her. End it properly this time." Weeks passed. Then months. The world began to move on, as it always does. Scandals turned to debates, debates to distractions. The files faded from headlines. The systems adjusted, rebranded, reinvented themselves. But the soldiers didn't forget. In a training camp outside Munich, a new batch of recruits stood on the same firing line where it all began, wind cutting through the mountains, snow swirling across the range. An instructor walked past them, voice sharp and clear. "This shot isn't about strength, it's about patience." He stopped behind one of the recruits, a young woman, nervous but focused. "Remember," he said softly, "noise can't hit what silence can see." The girl frowned. "Sir." He smiled faintly. "Old saying, you'll learn." She took the shot, and when the round hit center target, a faint smile crossed her lips. In the observation tower, the instructor turned to a plaque fixed to the wall. Small, unofficial. It read, "Reiter's Ridge, where silence spoke." That night in the barracks, the young recruit lay awake, scrolling through her tablet. She found the leaked files. She'd read the transcripts, watched the grainy footage, heard the voice recording attached to the final upload. That calm, measured voice. "My name doesn't matter. What matters is what we do after the noise fades." The recruit whispered the words to herself like a prayer. Then she closed the file, stared at the ceiling and smiled. Somewhere far from any barracks, in a nameless village near the Atlas Mountains, an old truck rattled along a dirt road. In the back, crates marked medical aid bounced with the uneven terrain. Sitting beside them was a woman with short hair, sunburned skin, and quiet eyes that had seen too much. Anna Reiter. Her clothes were plain, her hands calloused. She looked like anyone, and that was the point. The driver glanced at her. "They still talk about you, you know, the sniper." She smirked faintly. "People talk about ghosts all the time." He laughed. "You don't believe in ghosts." "I believe in what they leave behind," she said. The truck hit a bump. A small metal box slid toward her foot. She picked it up, opened it. Inside, a radio transceiver, compact and military grade. She turned the dial slowly, catching faint voices through the static, young soldiers coordinating relief supplies, volunteers rebuilding a ruined school, doctors sharing medical channels. All of it born from the networks that once carried orders for war. Now they carried something else. Hope. She smiled quietly. At least the frequencies found better use. The driver looked at her again. "You could have been anything. Why stay out here?" She looked out the window, watching the mountains rise in the distance. "Because out here, silence heals instead of kills." He didn't understand. Few would. But she didn't need him to. That evening, as the sun dipped low, she sat by the edge of a dried riverbed, cleaning her old rifle not out of need, but out of ritual. The barrel was worn, the paint chipped. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was memory shaped from steel and purpose. She adjusted the scope one last time, aimed at the far horizon, not to hit, just to look. Through the glass, she saw a child running with a kite made from torn fabric and wire. The wind caught it, lifting it higher than it should have gone. For a second she forgot everything, the weight, the loss, the war. For a second it was just wind and light. Then she lowered the rifle and whispered into the fading day. "You were right, Foss. Legends fade, but the silence they leave behind it teaches." That same night, hundreds of miles away, a soldier in a cramped base tent tuned a radio to an old, unused frequency, one that hadn't transmitted official traffic in years. At first there was only static, then a faint click. A familiar voice. Calm, steady, warm. If you're hearing this, you've already chosen. The world doesn't change with noise. It changes when someone listens. The young soldier froze, breath caught in his throat. He turned up the volume, but the transmission ended, replaced by silence. He sat there for a long time, staring at the speaker. Then he smiled, straightened his back, and went back to work. Outside, the night was clear. And somewhere far, quiet, unseen, Anna Reiter's message kept traveling, hopping from one forgotten frequency to another. Not a broadcast. A heartbeat. A signal that didn't fade. What remains when the battle ends and the world forgets to listen? For Sergeant Anna Reiter, the answer had always been silence. But silence, she'd learned, doesn't mean absence. It means endurance. Years had passed since the leaks. The headlines had long moved on new wars, new faces, new promises to remember. The story of Operation Gamma was now a case study in information ethics, reduced to lectures, footnotes, and debates in classrooms. But for those who had been there, who had seen the truth buried under paperwork and medals, Anna's name was still spoken quietly, in mess halls, on watch shifts, in the tired conversations between those who knew what loyalty really cost. She had become more than a myth. She had become a reminder. Far away, in the Moroccan highlands, morning broke across a valley that didn't exist on any map. A handful of tents stood against the wind, their fabric patched and sun-bleached. Inside one, Anna Reiter sat at a wooden table, the corners of her mouth softened by years and quiet acceptance. A radio sat beside her, old, dented, its antenna bent like a question mark. Its light blinked steadily, pulsing like a heartbeat. She was older now. The lines on her face were deeper, her hair streaked with silver. But her eyes, calm, sharp, endless, were still the same. She held a mug of tea, steam curling upward into the cold morning air. In the distance, she could hear children laughing, the rhythmic clang of metal as villagers built a water line she had helped fund. No uniforms, no ranks. Just people doing what soldiers rarely got to do, rebuild. Foss had passed 2 winters ago. Old wounds too deep to mend. Ramai had gone home, started an organization to support veterans who'd seen too much and been believed too little. They still sent her letters sometimes, through coded routes. But she never replied. She didn't need to. That morning the radio crackled softly, a voice breaking through static. A young woman's voice. Confident, steady. "This is Lieutenant Mara Vogel, Bundeswehr Reconnaissance Unit. Transmission 47. Operation briefing complete. And for the record, Reiter's ridge is clear." Anna smiled faintly. She'd never met Mara, but she knew the name. The recruit from the Alps, the one who'd learned that noise can't hit what silence can see. She listened as the young officer signed off, her voice fading into the static. It wasn't the content that mattered. It was the tone, calm, grounded, certain. That tone meant the world still had soldiers who understood what it meant to carry quiet strength. Anna reached for the dial, adjusted it gently, and whispered, "Good girl." Later that day, she walked through the village. Children ran past her barefoot, chasing a makeshift ball. Old men nodded as she passed, unaware, or maybe pretending not to know who she once was. A teenage boy carrying a toolbox followed her a few steps, then finally spoke. "Madame, were you really a soldier?" She stopped, turned, studied his face. "Who told you that?" "My uncle," he said proudly. "He said you stopped a war once." She smiled, soft and tired. "No one stops wars, child. We just make noise or silence and hope one drowns out the other." He frowned. "So which one did you make?" She looked at the horizon. the endless desert melting into sky. Neither, she said quietly. I learned to listen. The boy didn't understand, but he nodded anyway, the way the young do when they sense something larger than their words. That night she sat alone again by the radio. Outside, the stars were the same ones that had watched over her during every mission, cold, patient, eternal. She switched on the transmitter, fingers brushing across the familiar dials. For a long moment she said nothing. Then in a low, calm voice, she began to record. If anyone is still listening. I was a sniper once. I was trained to see farther than others. But I was never taught what to do when the truth came into view. We aim for perfection. We miss the human part. She paused, the wind sighing through the tent. They'll tell you obedience is safety. They'll tell you silence is strength. Both are lies, if you do know why you're being quiet. So listen not to orders but to conscience. Because conscience, that's the only commander who never lies. Her voice wavered, not from weakness but from honesty. If you ever feel alone in the field, remember this. Somewhere, someone has already walked through the same fire and lived. We don't all wear medals. Some of us carry scars instead. But scars mean you survived what others couldn't even name. She sat back, exhaled, and let the silence return. Then she reached forward, pressed send. The signal went out, weak but steady, bouncing off old satellites, lost frequencies, forgotten networks. Not meant to be viral. Just meant to exist. The next morning, her chair was empty. The radio still hummed. The mug of tea still sat half full, cold but undisturbed. Outside, villagers found her by the riverbank, sitting beneath the same tree she often used for shade. Her eyes were closed, her hands resting in her lap. There was no struggle, no pain. Just peace, quiet, absolute. They buried her at the edge of the valley. No marker, no name, just stones and wind. And the radio, still whispering faint static into the sky. Weeks later, her final transmission began to resurface, recorded, shared, and translated across dozens of languages. Some dismissed it as propaganda. Others called it art. But those who had served, those who'd carried the same silence she had, knew it was something else entirely. In bases around the world, soldiers began replaying her words before missions. Not as defiance, as reminder. That obedience means nothing without understanding. That strength means little without empathy. That silence isn't surrender, it's choosing when to speak. And in that understanding, her story stopped being hers alone. Months later, a documentary crew visited the old firing range in the Alps. Snow fell quietly, muffling the sound of the wind. They filmed the ridge, the targets, the plaque on the wall, Reiter's Ridge, where silence spoke. As the camera panned across the mountains, one of the sound engineers noticed something odd. Through the static of their recording gear, a faint signal was cutting through, rhythmic, steady. They boosted the audio. A voice calm, barely above a whisper. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Then nothing. The technician froze. Did you hear that? The director smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Leave it in. And so the story of Anna Reiter, the quiet sniper, the reluctant truth-teller, the ghost who chose conscience over command, became something that outlived history itself. No medals. No gravestones. Just a ripple of silence that taught the world how to listen again. Years later, in a small classroom for young cadets, an instructor ended his lecture with a question. Why do we train to be silent before we fire? A student raised her hand. To focus, sir. He smiled, partly, but mostly to remember that before you pull the trigger, you owe the world a moment of thought. He gestured to a photograph on the wall, black and white, uncaptioned. A woman lying prone in the snow, her face half hidden, her eyes steady. The class went quiet. "Silence," he said softly, "isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of purpose." Outside, the wind howled across the range. And for just a second, only a second, it sounded almost like a voice carried on the air. "Aim small, speak less, mean everything.